All for joining. Thank you all for joining. We'll get started in a minute or two. But in the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'll give one more minute for people to join, and then we'll get started. We'll go ahead and get started. Oleg?
Hi, everyone. I'm Oleg Spayalov, Communications Officer of the International Youth Nuclear Congress, and I'm excited to welcome you to Climate Talks, a collaborative effort between IYNC and the Clean Energy Ministerial's Now Future initiative. So Climate Talks is an innovative webinar series aimed at expanding the nuclear community's understanding of climate solutions beyond the traditional scope of nuclear science and technology, as well as offering opportunities to explore cross-cutting niche issues without our sector like consent-based siting. By engaging with experts from diverse fields, we are hopeful you will gain valuable insights that can lead to interdisciplinary collaboration and enhance our ability to communicate effectively within the climate community. So just a few words about IYNC. So at the IYNC, we fostering collaboration, knowledge exchange, and innovation in nuclear industry, and in particular among young professionals and students. Our community represents a diverse individuals committed to advancing the peaceful use of nuclear technology and its role in addressing global energy challenges. Our mission is to promote the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology to meet the world's growing energy demand while striving for a sustainable and low-carbon future. We support initiatives that champion safety, innovation, and the responsible utilization of nuclear energy. So these our activities. You can follow them on our social media and on the website, so please join. And I give floor to Joel. Please introduce Now Future initiative. Thank you. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Apologies. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining today's talk. So I'll give a brief overview about NICE Future. So NICE stands for Nuclear Innovation for Clean Energy Future. It is one of the work streams of the Clean Energy Ministerial. So this initiative recognizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solutions to energy, and it fosters collaborations among clean energy supporters in exploring diverse solutions, including nuclear energy technology solutions, both electric and non-electric, for clean, integrated, reliable systems for future. And as you can see on the first graph, we have a journal article or journal basically where we compile case studies of nuclear application. And on the right-hand side, you would see those 4 focus areas of NICE Future. And at the bottom, you would see our external partners and IYNC, who's with whom we are co-hosting this, as also our integral partner. Next slide, please. So nice future initiative pillars, right? So we have 5 working groups. So the first one focuses on messaging and communication, and this climate talks falls under that bucket. The second working group that we have is advanced reactor technology and innovative renewables integration, so nuclear renewable integration. The third one, we have economic modeling and financing, and we would be adding a regulatory aspect as well to that. Fourth one is on non-electric application. And then last one is on workforce development and mentorship. And we have the QR codes to follow, and please follow us if you want to learn more about the activities. And thank you all for joining today's call. And I know it's going to be an interesting session.
Thank you,
Back to
Del.
you.
Before we start, let me introduce our today's speaker. It's Ela Mesinovic. She holds a master's in politics and technology from the Technical University of München, specializing in energy and environmental politics. She's currently working at a local energy supplier, gaining practical experience in energy economics, public affairs, and sustainability. Ela serves as a contact point for the Energy Working Group of YOUNGO, the youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and was a delegate at COP28. She is also a board member of Club ALBA Croatia and EU Young Energy Ambassador, where she advocates for sustainable development and youth engagement in climate policy. So I stop sharing my screen and give floor to Ela. Ela, floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen before I kick things off. You should be able to see my presentation, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction into your initiative, IYNC, and also to give a brief overview on my biography so far. It's great to see that such initiatives exist where, you know, we're kind of getting able to merge the different bubbles of nuclear energy and other energy technology and policy enthusiasts, because I feel like for a lot of years they have been existing in silos, and communication has kind of increased throughout the years. So very happy to be here. So maybe to set the expectations, as Oleg mentioned before, I'm a policy person. So I would actually love to hear from you guys, maybe in the chat, like what your academic or professional background is. So I know a bit better what the background knowledge is on certain topics, maybe as part of my assumption, of course. But yes, therefore, I'm mainly focusing, of course, on energy policy and politics around it. And that's also like the lens that we're gonna view. So the developments of the past few years. So maybe what we're gonna talk about today, you've heard that I am energy contact point of the youth constituency, the children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC. So of course, I'm gonna give a brief introduction to YOUNGO. Then we're gonna shortly talk about the state of the climate report that just came out yesterday or 2 days ago. I'll provide a bit of context of energy governance, and then go into the challenges that transcend borders, give a short overview of the current governance landscape, provide a bit of intro of the case of the EU, because it is a interesting multilateral frame, that kind of a framework that also showcases the challenges that we're facing on a global scale, and then give a brief introduction into the UNFCCC, the main outcomes of last year's COP, what we are calling for as YOUNGO and COP29. Okay, I see some IR students. Nice. Also, please feel free to, once you have questions regarding specific slides or inputs, to put them in the chat so you don't forget them, and we can clarify them after the presentation. So yeah, let me kick off with the introduction to YOUNGO. So on a timeline, maybe, so with the creation of the UNFCCC, so the UN framework on climate change, framework convention on climate change, there has been a lot of mentions of youth throughout the year, and since its initiation in 1992, and one of the 9 sectors included in Principle 21 are children and youth. And since then, like, the history has evolved a bit of how integrated children and youth are in the multilateral climate governance process. So in 2005, ahead of COP11 in Montreal, we formally gathered already as like an international youth climate movement. And then in 2009 in Copenhagen, the Secretariat of the UNFCCC and its member states, they officially recognized youth as an observer constituency on its own. And then in 2011, there was this formalization of the constituency. And since then, YOUNGO has kind of evolved its work at COPs, so conferences of parties, but also like the SBs. So it's not the proper pre-COP event, but like a middle year ahead of COP conference, where we, and this you can see on the next slide, of course, advocate for youth voices, for the inclusion of youth voices in multilateral processes, but also for the inclusion of youth perspectives and demands. So not only voices in the sense of participation, but also in regards to the decision-making process itself, because of course, youth has also certain opinions on ongoing negotiations, but also on the trajectory of our world overall. And a part of the advocacy work and the lobbying work at those conferences throughout the year, we of course also do a lot of awareness raising, just as you are now with your initiative as well, and capacity building sessions. So we also have webinars on energy related topics, but also just transition, climate justice, human rights. So everything that is kind of intertwined with climate change policy, which is basically everything. So yeah, and then of course we're trying to facilitate collaborations with NGOs that are part of the constituency, but also outside of it. So maybe to provide a better understanding of like the space that we are operating in. So civil society is represented through 9 constituencies within the UNFCCC. So you see that children and youth is one of them, so YOUNGO, but you also have different ones like women and gender, indigenous people, researchers, business, and environmental NGOs. So YOUNGO in this case is like, yeah, an umbrella that is compiled of youth and children youth NGOs that are accredited to the UNFCCC, but also individuals. So you can be part of YOUNGO as just an individual, but also as a children and youth organization that is accredited to the UNFCCC. And then you kind of mobilize under the umbrella of YOUNGO. Maybe something else important to say, which is not in the slides here. So as of now, YOUNGO is a consensus-based constituency, so meaning that all decisions go through a consensus within the constituency, which of course is a more lengthy process, but therefore one of the most inclusive ones. And that's what you also get taught within the constituency, and is a great learning process in itself. So the structure, you see, we have 2 focal points, one global north, one global south, which are the direct bridge to the UNFCCC Secretariat. So information exchange can happen rather quickly. We get updates from the Secretariat on developments from the presidency. They provide us with information when we will be able to give input to certain work streams, ongoing negotiation tracks like that are happening throughout the years, because the YOUNGO as a constituency can also provide submissions, etc. So that is the role of the focal points. And then we have like the global coordination team, which is in charge of different aspects within YOUNGO, such as setting up bilaterals during COPs, but also one of the most important tasks, I would say, also is like the policy coordination. So YOUNGO always publishes a global youth statement, which I can put in the chat later. So it's basically the biggest demand document from children and youth that gets published at COP. It is a iterative process that happens throughout the years, where the working groups that you see here and on the next slide, there are a lot. So the working groups, one of them is energy, FYI. So the working groups submit their demands based on internal processes where you kind of develop your own section to the policy team, and simultaneously the policy team also receives inputs from other NGOs outside of YOUNGO, individuals, but also local conferences of youth and regional conferences of youth that happen throughout the year. And then this input is collected and concise into one big document. And currently the negotiation aligned demands are out, which you can find online, or I will share on the chat later, which contains like the demands from the global youth statement according to the negotiation items for COP29. I think that's like an overall introduction to YOUNGO. So what the energy working group does, maybe in general is, of course, we deal with all energy related thematics within the UNFCCC, build capacity through similar knowledge sharing sessions as we're doing now, exchange with other NGOs, with partners, have a lot of bilaterals with negotiators and decision makers, and of course at COP, where we talk about the demands that we have published upfront and share them with the UN institutions as well. Maybe that's enough on YOUNGO. And we can just dive into the topic that we're here for today, which is energy governance, right? So maybe if we just try to pose the question, and I am sure most of you are aware of this now, but I just included like some most recent data from the State of the Climate report. So why it is so important to actually govern energy systems and respectively energy emissions, as we can see that they have been on a rise. So in 2022, 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions were caused by global fossil fuel combustion and industrial processes. The rise of fossil fuel consumption in 2023 compared to 2022, what did I say? 2022 was accustomed to 1.5%. And this is mostly due to coal consumption. We still also had a rise in solar and wind energy in 2023 of 15%. But fossil fuel consumption was still 14 times greater than wind and solar energy consumption, and solar and wind mostly only covered the demand, but not the rise in demand. And for the first time, energy-related emissions actually exceeded 40 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2023, which was a rise of 2.1%. So yeah, it is known that fossil fuel production and extraction have been great drivers of global greenhouse gas emissions. This has been established by several institutes. This is well aware within the UNFCCC processes. And due to this undeniability, there is an urgent need to actually address these emissions. And especially looking from the perspective that with economic growth and with forecasts that we have today, energy demand is steadily growing. And it's not going to be reduced anytime soon. So from this, going from these numbers actually to like the status quo of energy governance today, which is mostly a domestic policy matter. And with this slide, I wanted to showcase why this is actually the case. So most of you probably know this energy trilemma triangle. So what energy policy actually tries to address is energy security, sustainability, equity, in terms of affordability as well. But this is mostly happening on a domestic policy matter. And why is this the case? So nations have different priorities, of course, due to national circumstances, which are, of course, of resource matter. So what kind of resources do you have within your territory? And also, what is the amount of resource that you have available to use, either for your own consumption or for export? Then what is the infrastructure that you already have in place? And depending on the existing infrastructure within your territory, you're also going to adapt your energy policy landscape. Then geography plays a vital role because your location on the roadmap puts you, well, in contrast to different nations and to different political circumstances and even maybe geopolitical tensions. So your geography definitely matters in terms of how your energy mix is determined. And then, of course, you have the issue or the drive of sovereignty. You do want to have an overhaul of your own energy mix, so you're not as dependent on other nations, which then again relates to your well, geographical location, or also the other aspects mentioned before, because after all, they're all interlinked, and you do want to decrease your dependency on others to increase your energy security, which is then but often determined by the availability of your natural resources within your territory. So, and the aspect of energy security, of course, is a big driver of why this is a domestic policy matter, so that all of the external shocks cannot affect your security of supply in a manner that will shut down your economy or even hurt livelihoods. So we've seen it has been a domestic policy matter since almost forever, but what we see increasingly, there are challenges that transcend borders and that need to be addressed on a global scale. And I'm sure you most of you can already think of challenges that exist within the energy governance landscape that have tried to be solved on the national level, but yeah, it's just not working out, as we see, because emissions are increasing. And this is just a brief overview to set the scene a bit, why we need to have more stringent global energy governance, which is to address global climate change. We know it is a global issue. This is nothing that one nation can solve alone. And especially to just coordinate and increase joint efforts, because this relates again to financing. With increasing demand and electrification, the energy transition is costly, especially for nations that are still lacking energy access. And this is nothing that can be, or that is stemmable by one nation alone, but you will need global coordination to finance the energy transition. And then, of course, there is this aspect of historical responsibility. So as mentioned, there are still a lot of people without access to electricity. And then the question needs to be addressed, how to actually facilitate technology transfer, maybe even leapfrogging aspects from European nations to maybe less developed economies. And of course, like global coordination, also in a field such as energy, which is sometimes tied to a lot of political tensions, can also promote stability, because if you have well-working economic cooperation and also partnerships with countries, it is less likely to come into bigger political distress. So yeah, this is just a brief overview of some of the challenges that energy governance could resolve, or global energy governance could resolve. But of course, there's a lot more. And now maybe turning on to what the governance landscape, or the international one, actually looks like at the moment. And this is not exhaustive, because I didn't include all like nation states, the European Union, or anything in here in this overview. We'll come to that later. But we see there are a lot of institutions and organizations that are having a hold in energy governance somehow. So for example, we see that the IEA has a mandate to provide policy recommendations, puts out a lot of data analysis, but also has capacity building for its member states. Currently there are 31, but then also these member states have a say in the strategic orientation or direction of the organization. So it is of course not only research-based in a sense, since it also gives out policy recommendations. Then you have UN Energy, which is not really, I mean, it's not a UN institution, although the name might advise differently, but it's actually an interagency mechanism. So they try to coordinate all energy-related aspects within the UN system, and mostly focusing on SDG 7. So to promote affordable energy. And then you have IRENA with a similar mandate as the IEA. I don't think I have to go into this further. And then more political task forces, in a sense, such as the G20 Energy Transition Working Group, where you have basically heads of states, the biggest nations, deciding on paths for the energy transition of the future. And then the forums or the working groups throughout the years have different foci, and this mandates just shift also in regards to the overall political arena, depending on heads of states and similar. So what is the problem? We have a very fragmented governance landscape, which misses authority. And sparks coordination challenges. And seeing how many or how big of a climate change issue energy system emissions are, we can't really afford this lack of coordination, and even which could even lead to further lock-in effects of due to existing profits from fossil fuel assets. And this kind of multi-layered system of energy governance can be witnessed within the European Union as well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with EU energy policy or energy governance. I have to admit that this is a favorite topic of mine, because I've wrote my master's thesis on this, and I'm kind of spending my everyday time to deal with EU energy policy. But it is actually a good showcase of the multi-layered systems of energy governance due to its multilateralism aspect. So you see overall that, for example, the EU has different, I won't go into too much detail now of EU institutions and policy making, but the European Union has different competencies and policy segments, and energy is again not easy to govern, as it's a shared competency. So meaning EU member states are only able to legislate and adopt legally binding acts if the EU has not decided to act on the respective issue. So if the European Union hasn't put out any legislation on this so far. This is tied to the Lisbon Treaty back in 2009, where again, it was defined that nations can determine their own energy mix. And this was negotiated by countries due to the facts that we mentioned earlier. So securing your own supply, also your neighbors' relations due to your geographical location and similar. So it is an issue in a sense on the European Union level as well. So yeah, you can see here what are the objectives of kind of EU energy governance. And yeah, what's interesting to say here, there are all these targets on the EU level, and there is legislation, but in the end, the energy mix is still determined by the country itself, and there are meta targets that have to be met in a sense, and especially when it comes to emissions reductions and share of renewables and similar, but the pathway, and of course also the European Union legislation might gonna change in the next 5 years. But as of now, the pathways have been very much steered by national states. There have been a few milestones in EU energy governance since 2005. So again, not going into too much detail of EU energy governance, but there have been targets of shares for renewables. The highest at the moment is 42.5, with an ambition to reach 45% by 2030, which as of now, as far as I know, is not going to be met. Their revision of EU ETS happened. The Repower EU plan actually was a big outcome of the energy security crisis starting in early 2022. So kind of redefining the way of EU energy governance basically, and coming in with a lot of new or acceptance for new technologies, I would say, than it was the case before. Yeah, and like the packages before, they mostly deal with like energy efficiency matters and similar. But as this is of interest to me personally, I'm sure it's not to everyone, but yeah, it kind of tries to govern the impacts a bit of energy systems on the national level. Yeah, so this is a good showcase on how fragmented energy governance already is happening on a multilateral scale, and why it was also an issue so far on the global scale. Okay, and now looking at the UNFCCC itself. So we've been talking a lot about like intergovernmental organizations, or we've mentioned intergovernmental organizations, the UN system, the European Union, but we do also have the UNFCCC in place, which has mandate to govern climate change on a global scale, and has the primary objective to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. So I assume most of you already know that the UNFCCC kind of provides us with agreements such as the Paris Agreement, which are negotiated in lengthy processes at COPs, so at conference parties, and agreed by in consensus. And then out of those agreements, so for example, Paris was the CMA agreement, different work streams and negotiation tracks arise. And here I listed a few that are specifically tied to, or not specifically tied to energy, but the overall issue with energy governance that we're facing also reflects within the UNFCCC process, because it is still a cross-cutting theme, as it will probably always be the case, because energy is just interrelated in all of our, in all aspects of climate change and mitigation and adaptation and just transition. But still, it can be it is an aspect in all of those different negotiation tracks, but there is little alignment within those or among those. So maybe just as a brief introduction into four of those that I picked out here, because they've been under discussion most recently, is the Mitigation Work Program. So this was established in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And the primary objective of the Mitigation Work Program, or the MWMP, is to scale up and enhance mitigation action across all sectors. And one of those sectors, for example, last year was energy, because it then always has different themes for certain time periods where it tries to really accelerate action, and energy was such a topic last year. Yeah, you can also see, so the MWP, it aims to recognize the different challenges of sectors, and also acknowledges the importance of technology transfer and finance, and really wants to target implementation. But what we have seen so far is that the Mitigation Work Program has been blocked during COPs most of the time, so that no real progress has occurred through the MWP. For the Just Transition Work Program, so the main objective is to transition to a low carbon and sustainable economy in a socially equitable and inclusive way. This is often including the topic of just energy transition, which, by the way, is also hard to define. So there wasn't like major progress on energy related issues in the Just Transition Work Program as well. Then we have the NDCs, which are also a requirement under the Paris Agreement, where countries submit climate action plans that outline their ambitions and targets every 5 years. And on energy, like energy efficiency targets, increase of renewable shares, etc., are included as well. and the submission of the NDCs. So for example, the EU is submitting a joint NDC. They're mostly tied to also other different either UNFCCC reporting processes of like inventories, GHG emissions in general, are tied to the NDC process, or vice versa, so that there is not much misalignment in reporting, which would kind of assume coordination amongst plans, but still, like, countries are submitting NDCs way too far, not within deadlines, and definitely not reaching the ambition that is needed, because the level of ambition, and if it actually meets the Paris Agreement targets, is assessed in the global stocktake process. So the global stocktake process, which we witnessed last year for the first time, is an assessment of the long-term climate goals, so of NDCs. And as mentioned, if they meet the ambitions under the Paris Agreement. And it's a 2-year process considering of a 1.5 years of technical phase, so where the assessment actually takes place, and then the political phase where kind of the output of the technical assessment is agreed on amongst decision makers. So this culminated at COP28 last year. So yeah, you've kind of seen there's this overview of different work streams and negotiation tracks that are kind of dealing with energy, but it's a cross-cutting issue so far. Wait, let me see. Yeah. I did not know that it still has effects. Okay, I'm sorry for that. So yeah, talking about COP28 and the global stocktake, which took place for the first time last year, there were some energy-related outcomes, and that most of you probably also know of. Of course, these are not exclusively the main outcomes of COP28, but just a few that I want to highlight here. So we've reached an Article 28 of the global stocktake decision. The goal to triple renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, double the global rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030 as well, accelerate efforts to phase down unabated coal power, and you got the wording of transitioning away from fossil fuels and energy systems. I don't know if you've seen the latest IEA report that came out on exactly these goals under Article 28, and apparently under current ambitions, the tripling of renewable energy capacity, for example, worldwide won't be met by 2030. It's close, but we're not there yet. And maybe just to highlight that COP28 was a unique COP in a sense for energy related emissions as well, or for energy text in general, because there was no proper energy text before COP28. So it was very much coined as an energy COP by the presidency beforehand. And this also, of course, due to the location of the conference and due to the media outlets posted by the presidency throughout the year. And yes, we know that the UAE is a big exporter of oil and gas, and that energy will be a thematic during COP28, and therefore it also, of course, had a lot more political momentum during COP28 to accelerate any text on energy. And this also fostered collaboration within private sectors. So we saw a lot of alliances happening before COP, such as, for example, the Global Renewables Alliance that advocated quite loudly together with the IEA, IRENA, before COP28 already for those tripling of renewables target, for example. So there was a lot of political momentum, but I would say also pressure to really incorporate decisions. at COP28. And of course, due to the global stocktake taking place, everyone kind of knew that progress had to be made. And there were, of course, apart from that, from the negotiations, there were also endorsements pledged. I mean, you've probably seen the methane pledges. I think there was a nuclear pledge as well, signed by parties and private sectors, because there was just such a unique momentum at COP28. But this is usually not the case. So the global stocktake happening every 5 years is, of course, not enough to really foster progress on the energy transition in general, but also mitigating emissions overall on a global scale. So maybe you've heard it before, but the Global Youth Statement, and this comes from the YOUNGO Energy Working Group, and then also from collaborations with other institutions and NGOs, we called for a dedicated energy negotiation track for the first time last year, I believe. And then, of course, also again this year, you can find it on the first page of the negotiated aligned demands that we will send in the chat later. And the call for the dedicated energy negotiation track, or our vision of it, is to really establish a unified framework that integrates the key commitments, as you've seen before. So, for example, the tripling of renewables under Article 28, really enhance technology and finance mechanisms, and include all stakeholders, so including also children and youth, of course. And why we call it, as I mentioned, it cannot be the case that we come to groundbreaking energy decisions only every 5 years, because we do need them more often, and we especially need to focus on implementation. So kind of moving from the high level ambition to implementing the energy transition, and also seeing that there are still so many people without access to electricity. So if we really want to facilitate a just energy transition, we kind of need the space to govern it somewhere, and to foster dialogue, and to bring stakeholders together, and to really focus on the energy sector and energy systems. Yeah, and maybe just as a quick outlook for COP28, because there is, of course, no energy negotiation track yet, but there are some debates and some negotiations that might be interesting to look out for, and that could potentially include relevance for energy systems as well. I'm sure you've heard of the new collective, or the debates around the negotiations around the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, so the NCQG. Like the climate finance target is going to run out 2025. So they kind of need to agree on a new target. And mitigation is one of the pillars addressed within the NCQG. And it could be that some countries maybe call for energy-related mitigation measures as a requirement for finance, for example, or that the layers of financing are tied to different qualifications or requirements, as mentioned. Then there are negotiations about NDC features. So NDCs are built according to a specific outline, which is defined in the Paris Agreement. And this year's discussion is going to be based around expanding the NDCs outline, and features. How this is going to look like is not specified as far as I know, but there is talk about having, for example, GST targets within there, and how this could be included is then up for debate. And then, of course, Article 6, so establishing like a carbon market, where you could also drive mitigation in energy systems, because countries or parties, as well as private sector, will be able to trade carbon certificates. But this is still it needs to be operationalized, especially 6.4, which is the market-based approach. And then 6.8, so Article 6.8 is kind of a voluntary, non-market-based approach to foster cooperation. And then, since I mentioned earlier that a mitigation work program is politically blocked a bit, there is the UAE dialogue, which came out of COP28, which is also like a follow-up on global stocktake processes, is gonna, or kicked off already, and is gonna continue. So there are some which are kind of hoping for some more mitigation ambition within the UAE dialogue, or to transfer those discussions that should happen under the MWP to the UAE dialogue on GST. Yes, but this is like only a glimpse of what to look out for during COP29. If you're on the ground or just from media outlets, I think it's still going to be, although it's not an energy COP, it's still going to be interesting to witness and see how the international landscape develops in terms of energy governance, especially as COP30 next year in Brazil is going to be a very big COP probably, and of great relevance. So there's maybe some outlook on what's to await in Brazil. Yes, but that's all from my end. I hope this was a brief overview of the relevant topics related to energy governance. And yeah, I'm happy to hear if there are any questions from your side, and I hopefully can answer them.
Thank you very much, Ela, for this presentation. It was very informative. Please, guys, post your questions in this chat, and yeah, I will read it later. But
Sharing?
just before that, this year I took part in SB16 conference in Bonn. So yeah, and I found this climate change topic is broader than I was thinking, you know. A lot of acronyms, a lot of terms that you have to know to speak the same language with the experts. And during this XB conference, I heard some opinions that young people should be more involved in the decision-making process. Maybe you've got some plans for upcoming COP29 in Baku. Maybe you've scheduled some side events or meetings, or you will participate in discussions. Can you just tell us a bit more about your plans for COP29?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's good to hear that there was, again, raised voices about more youth participation. Maybe just to clarify on this, there was this big campaign last year on meaningful youth engagement, and there are movements within the UNFCCC that are also fostering youth engagement, such as through the constituency itself. But just to say up front, like youth engagement should be a baseline, and what really matters is to really have a say in the decision-making process, because oftentimes it's more about like visuals and to have youth present, but not really to allow them to meaningfully participate, so to actually participate. And of course, like through the youth constituency, there will be a few people present on the ground, and so they actively take part in negotiations, and then also receive the floor to come in with interventions during negotiations. And what is also happening is the Youth Climate Forum, for example. We also have an energy session, so it's an NCQG X energy session, where youth talks to negotiators that are relevant in these policy spaces, and we kind of voice our demands that are based on the GYS, so the Global Youth Statement. And then this culminates on like a big event, a headline event, where hopefully the most influential negotiators come together with youth and kind of get presented with our demands. And yes, apart from that, of course, a lot of side events are also happening, but those are happening anyways. But this year, we're really trying to focus on getting youth involved in the negotiations, because that's where the progress is ultimately made in terms of policy. But of course, awareness raising and similar can also happen through side events.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I can see other questions in the chat. And if you don't mind, I've got one more. During SB, I heard some experts said that COP29 is going to be finance COP. Yeah, do you have any idea what does it mean and what you expect of this COP?
Yeah, I think definitely it's going to be a finance COP that has kind of crystallized as of now. So I mentioned the NCQG before. The target of 100 billion is gonna it's gonna exceed in 2025. So countries need to agree on a new climate finance target, and it is also known that it needs to move from billions into trillions to actually meet aspects, like to actually meet the demands within or the ambitions within NDCs, and to facilitate the energy transition. Like, you need money for all of those things, but there are a lot of questions that still need to be addressed. So in terms of like structure of the NCQG, what kind of financing does it include? Is it structured in different layers? Is there like a grand core so that developed countries do not get in further debt? Because this is something, of course, for equity and climate justice reasons you want to avoid, that you put developing countries in more debt through developed nations financing, but then also to which requirements the money is tied, if it's to any mitigation ambitions. So there are a lot of negotiation chips that kind of still can be traded within the NCQG, but those are going to be very lengthy and hard discussions or debates, I would say. But it's definitely going to be a finance COP. Yeah.
Yeah. So we will see soon the results of COP29 in Baku. I think we've got just 2 more minutes, and I think we need to wrap up our discussion, but we can continue it on LinkedIn, maybe. So you shared your page in the chat. I will send it once again, and I think participants can ask questions if there appears. And maybe last one, short one, what would you recommend to read to start to get involved into climate topic? What resources, sources of information you can recommend to read?
I would suggest, so the 2024 State of the Climate report that I showed in the beginning gives a very brief overview of, tipping points, where we're at the moment. And then I would definitely suggest the IPCC report. You don't necessarily have to go through the whole document. You can read the policymakers version, which is still like 40 pages or something. And then the IEA Net Zero Pathways. The World Energy Outlook, the new one, is going to come out on 15th or 16th of October, also from the IEA. So definitely IPCC synthesis report, AR7, the State of the Climate Report, Net Zero Pathways of the IEA, because like the GST targets last year were based a lot on them, and the World Energy Outlook, which is going to come out, 15th or 16th of October. This is not a plug or something. I just actually saw that on LinkedIn today that it's going to come out soon.
Cool. So I think it would be useful to share these reports in the comments in social media. Like a result of our discussion. So if there is any questions, so far I can see them in the chat. So I'd like to thank you once again for participation in this interesting discussion and introduction in climate change topic. And yeah, see you soon, hopefully on the next Climate Talks initiative.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.